This is the Dreadful Podcast from TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about Lovecraft Country, the season finale, Full Circle.
There's got to be another way to stop Christina.
If my life taught me one thing, it's that we tell ourselves we have a choice, but we don't. With George and Montrose, I never had one. They both were a part of my soul. And I never should have been scared of that. I can see now all of our love made you. You've got the best parts of both of them. Montrose's fierce heart and George's integrity. You're a hero, just like in those stories you used to cherish. And Hanna's spell, it's gonna change everything, baby. This is a beginning, not an end.
Welcome back, fellow Dreadfuls, to TV Podcast Industries and the Dreadful Podcast. Yes, we are moving straight into the finale of Season 1 of Lovecraft Country, and it is Full Circle. I am one of your hosts, John.
I'm your other host, Derek. The finale of, I'm going to say, probably the best show I've seen since Watchmen. This was a fabulous season of the show. Really looking forward to chatting about this final episode where everything does come full circle and every single episode from the season is tied into this finale in some great ways.
Yeah, absolutely. They head back to Ardham County to spell, counterspell, and you name it, sort of get it done, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you who've joined us for our Lovecraft Country coverage. We've mentioned before on the podcast that this kind of came out of nowhere. We watched the first episode and went, this is great. We can't not talk about it. So this is actually an additional podcast that we stuck into our schedule just purely because the show was so good. So thanks to all of you for sending in your wonderful messages to us of support for the chat that we've been having over the last 10 episodes. Thanks for all of you that have been emailing us, correcting us and giving us information on elements of the show that we didn't recognize or didn't know. It's been really, really fun getting all of your messages, even the ones we haven't read out in the podcast have been great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, fellow Dreadfuls. It's really been great having you on board. It's appreciated so much. All the feedback, all the comments, the discussion has really helped us to become illuminated and really learn more stuff through the program that is Lovecraft Country.
Absolutely.
Really great stuff. Thanks, guys and gals.
Absolutely. Speaking of feedback, we got another 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts from Love Bliss Joy. We know Love Bliss Joy is listening to our podcasts about Lovecraft Country, but this feedback is actually about our Penny Dreadful City of Angels podcast that we did earlier on this year, John. Love Bliss Joy says, I've watched the latest series of Penny Dreadful City of Angels. I enjoyed it some, but I'm here to give you guys, including Chris, who I think is hilarious, a thumbs up. I've really enjoyed listening to this podcast. You have another loyal fan to add to your long list. You go to so much depth explaining each episode, which is great, along with, as usual, your sense of humour. Stay safe over there in Ireland, guys. Blessings, Lola from Liverpool.
Thanks so much, Lola. Really great to get your review. And thanks for the 5-star review. It's really nice to get that feedback through. And just for your kind words, it's just really nice, and we hope we can measure up with our future podcasts as well.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks so much, Lola. I know it's really nice to get feedback like that. Really nice to get 5-star reviews over on Apple Podcasts. If you want to leave a review for us, just search for either TV Podcast Industries or the Dreadful Podcast or even Lovecraft Country, and our feed should pop up there on any good or evil podcast catcher where you can leave us a review.
Yes, please subscribe, share us, rate us, leave a review, because, of course, sharing the podcast is sharing the love.
Exactly.
And, of course, if you want to support us in any other ways, we also have our Patreon. Just head on over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, a big special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who have joined us since September the 1st. A big shout out to Salima Kisler, William Boggs, Donald Dennis, Damian Roberts, Skyrocker, Marianne Morris, and Parthenia Locklear. Mm-hmm. Really nice to have you guys on board and supporting us. It really does mean a lot, and it really helps us support the production of all the podcasts that we do. So a big thank you to our Patreon supporters there.
Absolutely. I think it's the time of year normally that we renew all of our websites and all of our feeds. There's obviously a cost involved in that. So thank you so much for helping to support that. We've been going for about 6 years. So, really good to have some support and cover that cost so we can just get on with the fun, of chatting about all the shows that we love talking about with our wonderful listeners. Thank you so much to everyone that's supporting us on Patreon.
Yeah, a big thank you to all of you who have supported us, whichever way you are supporting us. Mm-hmm. It's really, really nice of you. But let's get into our spoiler-filled discussion of the finale of Lovecraft Country, Full Circle. Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Well, the episode this time was directed by Nelson McCormick, his first episode of Lovecraft Country that he's directed. Done loads and loads of TV shows. I mean, like, the list just goes on for so long, right back to, I think, 1995 is when he directed his first TV show. But did direct 3 episodes of Hunters this year on Prime. A really good show. Really enjoyed that with Al Pacino, about Nazi hunters. Really interesting show. Check that out. I know there's a second season of that coming, so it'll be very interesting to see. We spoke about Nelson McCormick before, years ago, when he directed an episode of season 1 of Daredevil, episode 9 of the season.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that was the one with the fight between Matt Murdock, or Daredevil, and Nobu. So I definitely remember that episode well. So really good.
That's
director.
A good 4 years ago, maybe even 5. Yeah.
It's a long
when
time.
We were starting on our Defenders TV podcast run, which of course now is subsumed into TV podcast industries.
Exactly.
And is our
hostile takeover, some might say.
Well, exactly. But it is our handle for all things Marvel on TV podcast industries, is the Defenders. And hopefully we will be coming up with some more Defenders podcasts, with WandaVision coming out, and of course all the other slated TV shows from Marvel and Disney.
Loads of stuff coming up.
Loads of them.
But great to have Nelson on board for this episode. And the writers of this episode, once again, Misha Green on writing duties, as she has been all the way throughout this season as showrunner of the show. And the story was written by Misha Green with Ayahuma Afordir. Again, Ayahuma wrote episode 8 of the show, Jigabobo, the whole episode around D. So back on board with a writing credit for this final episode. I know this had a full writer's room where they all worked really collaboratively together on each episode. So I know the writing credits may not represent everybody that was involved in the writing process of every episode, but really cool to have Misha Green so focused. I think I mentioned it earlier on, the episode's called Full Circle, and there certainly ties back to every one of the 9 episodes, I think, right from the beginning. There's some elements pulled out all the way back to there. So, John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your final summary for season 1 of Lovecraft Country?
Sure. With the Book of Names in their possession, Atticus and Leti begin the incantation to remove the curse from Dee's body, but are pulled through to another place where they are connected to Hanna and Atticus's mum, Dora, who impart their wisdom of magic and their family on them. Removing the curse from Dee, Leti, Atticus, Hippolyta and Montrose set about to disrupt Christina's plans for Atticus. After obtaining the flesh of Titus Braithwaite using the Book of Names, they also enlist Ji-Ah and ask Ruby to obtain the final part of their counterspell, a piece of Christina's body. As the autumnal equinox approaches, the gang return to Ardham County, joined by Ruby, Ji-Ah and Dee, to begin their offensive. But their plans are thrown into chaos as Christina has taken the form of Ruby, who lies in a coma back in Chicago. Throwing Leti from the village tower and capturing Atticus with the help of the Ardham locals, Christina, as the moon rises high in the sky, performs her spell on Atticus to become immortal. But as all seems lost, Leti and Ji-Ah come together to connect Atticus with Christina and begin their counter-incantation. In an explosive force of magic, Christina is beaten, but at a terrible cost. The willing sacrifice of Atticus to die ensures that his unborn son, his family and friends are protected, but also the power of magic is removed from the Braithwhites and white people to the Freemans and black people. In the emotional aftermath of Tick's death, as they get ready to leave Ardham County behind, Dee approaches the injured Christina and crushes her neck with her new bionic arm.
Oh yes, the bionic arm of Diana. I love it. We mentioned last episode that I was reminded of Luke Cage when we saw Leti have the bullets bounce off her when she had her first protection. And we have another character from Luke Cage, another character very closely associated with Luke Cage, Misty Knight, who does have a bionic arm in the comic books and in the TV show eventually when she finished up season 2 of Luke Cage. She had a bionic arm. So here we have two massive black characters from Marvel Comics kind of doing a little translation into Lovecraft Country, which I love. They're the proper superheroes of Marvel Comics and those shows, so and those comics. So really cool to see that kind of translation of Dee into this superhero with her bionic arm at the end.
It was just fantastic. I was wondering what was in that room that Hippolyta took Dee to say that she would be able to draw again. What was she going to do? And here we have the answer, the bionic arm. And it also just the fact that she so sort of purposefully crushed the windpipe and the neck of Christina, who had lost all her magic and was lying injured under a pile of rubble after the big sort of black blast of magic or blast of black magic, whatever it was that happened in that big finale.
Absolutely.
It was really, really good. And it did remind me then of I'm Crushing Your Neck. I'm Crushing Your Neck after, I can't remember the name of the show now.
Kids in the Hall.
Kids in the Hall, a Canadian program where it was like, I'm crushing your head. I'm crushing your head. Where they would pretend to crush people's heads from far away.
Yeah, exactly.
With their fingers.
Very hard to describe a comedy sketch on a podcast, but yeah, that's definitely it. I love the choice of the director in that scene or maybe the director, maybe in the writing, but just literally as she crushes the neck, like she was dead almost, and then you just see the absolute massive spurt of blood spreading across the ground as she properly crushes her to death. There's no coming back from that.
Absolutely. I thought she was going to put her pet Shoggoth onto her, to be honest. I thought the head was going to get removed, but instead she decided that it was her that needed to do that to bring closure on Christina Braithwaite.
You got to test out your new arm somehow, really.
Well, I thought it was originally going to maybe be with some pencils or a paintbrush or some kind of colouring pen, but no. Yeah. But she could have used the blood red to do a sort of a blood picture.
Maybe that's something that they'll save for next season.
All these magical tomes are all written in the blood of someone.
It's true. That's very true. Yeah. So maybe that's going to be one of Diana's new tasks that she's going to follow up in future. But let's get into discussing the episode itself. I did love that as the closer. We've gone straight for the closer of the episode because it was a bit of a shocking moment, I suppose. But let's get into our discussion about the episode itself, because we kicked off directly at the start, and I had to actually ask John about this after watching the episode, where they saved Dee a second time, effectively. We saw Christina being involved in kind of banishing Topsy or Bopsy from the possession of Diana, where she translated back into her old self effectively after some magic that Christina had done. This time they now have the book that they picked up back at night 21, and then they do another spell to completely banish the possession that she has on her. And I had to ask John after watching, I was kind of going, why is she back into the exact same state that she was at the start of last episode, even though they went and got the book? And he was saying, understandably, obviously for some reason I'd forgotten in a week, but he was saying that effectively they had called out that she's constantly going to be chased down forever until she's completely consumed and killed by this possession, especially because we know that the person that cast the spell, Lancaster, is now dead and he can't remove the spell. So the only way to do it is with the Book of Names. So that was why she looks exactly the same as she did at the start of the last episode, which I was kind of surprised at. I don't know why, because we didn't see her look like that throughout all of last episode.
So Christina didn't remove the curse.
Exactly.
She just reset the curse, which was then Dee as we know her. And of course, she said to them that the curse will follow her to catch up with her and effectively to take possession again. And so what we see in that time period between leaving the observatory after getting the Book of Names to being back in Chicago, that at some point, Topsy and Bopsy had caught back up with Dee and had begun to inhabit her once again. The thing is, with this spell that happens, from Leti and Atticus when they use the Book of Names to banish that curse, we see Dee has the curse removed from her body, but her arm is permanently damaged. And I think there's really great through this episode, given this is the last episode, that they spent the time with her and Hippolyta, where Dee is blaming Hippolyta. It's her drawing arm. She's sad that she might not be able to draw ever again. But we have this kind of involvement of Dee as well in the plans to save Atticus from Christina's autumnal equinox shindig that she's going to do. And I thought that was really nice,
It's really important,
Yeah, and I think, important because this is the first time these two characters have connected back in since Hippolyta left to go traveling the multiverse. And Dee, understandably, was wondering where her mum had gone, given her dad, George, has died, given one of her best friends, Bobo, has also died or been murdered. So,
I
thought this was really important.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned in the episode, she was kind of ignored by Leti and by Tick and by Ruby. She kind of had an opportunity, and Montrose as well. She tried to talk to them all, to tell them what was going on with her, and they all kind of ignored them and were absorbed by their own selves. And in a way, that's kind of what Hippolyta was doing. We heard her have that moment of, I am a mother. That is one of my primary purposes, but I also have all of these other things. I am Hippolyta. I am in control of all of these other things about me. But she made the choice to stay there and then come back to save Dee when needed. And Dee's kind of going, but I needed you before then. I needed you to stop this from happening to me effectively. And Hippolyta's response to her saying, well, I would have come back if I'd known it was this bad. I would have come back earlier. And I love Dee just responding to her and turning away, saying, I don't care what you would have done. It's what you did do. And you came back, and look at me now. Look what happened to me now. Which I just think is a great kind of closing of that argument, or a continuation of that discussion as to why Hippolyta chose to stay in this other place and live out her life a different way, even though she could return to help Dee whenever she needed to. But Dee saying, well, you left me alone, basically. So this is how bad it got because you left me alone. So I did love that conversation. It's not a closed argument. I love that with Lovecraft Country. They're very, very detail oriented, very, very well written kind of character moments that we have throughout the season. And nobody is a straight down the line black or white character. Everybody is a shade of grey. Everybody has good things and bad things about them, including Hippolyta. I definitely applaud her decision to stay and explore the multiverse and have these amazing adventures that she has. Absolutely. Just because you're a mother doesn't mean you can't have adventures in your life, but they do still need to call out that she didn't come back to save her child at the right time, I suppose. So at least she's making it up with her. At least she gets a really cool bionic arm from her mother's adventures, which is very cool. So,
yeah, absolutely. And she gets a pet Shoggoth as well from Atticus. I think the interesting thing here, what Dee's position and what her the removal of the curse, what that shows is how now they have the Book of Names, that the kind of magic powers that they have at their disposal, and in trying to remove the curse, they get transported to see Hanna and Dora, and this moment where you have Hanna explaining to Atticus that he will save everyone if he uses the book, and as we see himself as that sacrifice.
Yeah.
But also he learns from his mother Dora about Montrose and George, and I love that moment where she tells him, you have the best of both. You have Montrose's fierceness and George's integrity.
Yeah.
And of course these all play out really importantly for right at the end, especially with the letter that Atticus has written for Montrose.
Yeah.
And of course with Hanna, and also Tick's great grandmother from Tulsa that we saw, who gave the Book of Names to Leti.
Yes.
She's back as well, and
Leti, yeah.
she knows more than maybe what we knew she knew from the last episode 9. And of course this all comes together and begins their journey to try and save Atticus from Christina's new spell that she's going to use, which effectively requires Atticus to die. And I think what I really liked about this episode as well is just how it connected back so many different things. You know, we were saying about it being an anthology series where there is an undercurrent or overarching story here, but it went to the museum, it went to the multiverse, it went to Tulsa, but it all had connective threads. And what I really liked here is that this episode really connected back to what you could have described as being a very individual episode.
Yeah.
And we see that, I think, most in the fact that they do go back down through the elevator in Letty's house. Again, a call back to that episode and the importance of that elevator and the house that she has bought. And back to the museum, the chamber right below Titus Braithwaite's statue in the museum in Boston, where they call again their ancestors, Hanna, Hattie, Dora, to bring back Titus Braithwaite here. This was an amazing scene.
Yeah.
I thought this was so good, and I loved how it played out, that they didn't get him to begin with. You kind of thought, okay, is he going to really feature here? But they the second time they managed to bring him back and get him, because they need part of his body for combating Christina's spell.
Yeah, but I love that he escaped after they called him back. He escapes and catches up with Christina in the street, tells her they've got the book, and then is pulled back in again to this circle as they kill him and take a piece of his skin. It took me a while to just recognize what it was that Atticus was cutting out of him. It looks like it's part of his chest, because as I was watching it, I thought he was cutting out his heart to take with him, but it seems much flatter than a heart, unless this guy just doesn't have a heart.
Yeah, I think it's just a piece of flesh, ultimately, yeah.
Which plays the part later on as part of the ritual that they're doing, where he has to eat the flesh of Christina and of Titus. So that was a really interesting one. And as I say, I love that we have all the different generations of the Freeman family, including Leti now, because, she's going to be she's the carrier, effectively, of the next generation of Freemans. So she is part of their family completely. Which I love that it is all 5 of them now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the important part. Leti is not a Freeman by blood, but with the unborn child, the son of Atticus and herself, that she is now part of that family tree. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, because really bringing the show to its central themes, this episode repeats it on many occasions. This show is about family. This show is about everybody forming a family, no matter where they come from and what their connection is. We talked about it much earlier on in the season about Ruby and Leti. Yes, they're sisters of the same mother, but the two of them really had no relationship, or had a bad relationship before their mother passed, and they still had a bad relationship. And here, Leti tried to make up in some sense with Ruby by buying the house and having the two of them live together, so the two of them could kind of rekindle that lost sisterhood that they may have had. And this comes back here in the final episode. They had problems over the course of the season and separated from each other a few times over the season, but here, over the grave of their mother, Leti tries to reach out to Ruby, saying to her, I know that we haven't been sisters in the past, but we are really family. Can you help me here in this task that we have to do to defeat Christina? Knowing that Ruby has that connection with Christina, she's trying to play on the fact that they are family in some sense. Ruby does push back on it, though, which again, another good choice for the show. She's saying to her, this is just your version of sisterhood. Your version of sisterhood is, I come and ask Ruby whenever I need something. I ask you to do it for me. That's not sisterhood, So there was that kind of idea that Ruby wasn't going to get involved in this group's final plan, I suppose.
Absolutely. And but we have Leti say to her, there's something else, and then we never hear that something else. But whatever it is, it seems to maybe persuade Ruby to get that piece of Christina. But unfortunately, maybe it is not quite so subtle about getting it, or it is rumbled by Christina.
Exactly.
And that effectively brings about one of the huge twists, which you were thinking, as they got into Woody to drive back down to Ardham County, and Ruby is with them. You're just there all the time thinking, is this the real Ruby, or is this Christina in the form of Ruby?
Yeah.
And again, it's that connection back to that whole episode around that transformation here playing out in the final episode in such an instrumental and significant way, which I think is just really testament to how the construction of this series in terms of the writing and the episodes that have preceded this final one, how they all have a part to play in this, from the museum, from the house, from the transformation, using the spell, all through to the multiverse, through Tulsa,
and Ji-Ah, of course,
and of course Ji-Ah. And that's the other one where, again, in some respects, this mirrors what's happening with Leti and Ruby, and that Tick is going to make his peace, or try to make his peace, to reconnect with someone that he loved, in Korea whilst he was there, with the army during the Korean War. And Ji-Ah then is also another one that is there in Woody as they travel on down to Ardham County.
Yeah, that's a great road trip. I love it. I love that, it's one of those things, because they could have easily just skipped it. They're not saying anything that's important to the plot, but having everybody in this new family, effectively, again, Tick calls out that because of the experience that he and Ji-Ah went through, they are family now. They are connected. They are bound. Even though they may never have a relationship, he understands now that she is, effectively, as she says, she is a monster. She's not human, so they can't have a relationship as such. He's with Leti now, and forevermore. But I love that he calls out that they're family. But this road trip that they have together, where they're on their journey there, and they have, as everybody does on a good road trip, they have a good old sing-along.
Yeah, they even get Montrose in on the act.
Absolutely.
Finally, you can see him kind of going, I'm not getting involved. Yeah. And then in the end, by just the force of the good time that everyone's having, singing along, he gets involved.
Yeah, really, really good fun. Really good fun. I guess let's get down to the final battle, like the final showdown, I guess, at the end of the episode, John, because we talked about a lot of the kind of lead up to getting there, I suppose. But I enjoyed how they set up this kind of defensive spell that's going on, where they have each of them going around setting everything up. We have
I was thinking Supernatural with all the salt rings in this episode, and in particular the salt ring to eclipse all previous protective salt rings. I mean, Montrose must have been they must have had about 100 of those boxes of salt. He was going through the forest, he was going down the bridge. This was the mother of all salt rings.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was wondering how they got the Shoggoth with them down there, because we saw when they went into the house before leaving, they went into Leti and Ruby's house and went into the lift, and you can hear the noise of the Shoggoth, I think, underground. Was that what the monster was?
It was in the basement, because they've got, there's a basement, and then there's a basement again, and then there's the caverns. So this is the house with 3 creepy layers of basement. And I think the Shoggoth was held in the concrete one, where Leti was doing her developing of her photos.
Yes. I think so. Yeah.
But I also wonder with the Shoggoths if they're able to teleport, because I mean, ultimately, I just feel that Yeah, they certainly didn't have the Shoggoth strapped to the roof of Woody. It wasn't down in the spare tire compartment. So I think it's just that when called upon, when in their master or the person that they're protecting, they're summoned, so pop up through the ground. So
like a cool scene with Diana being attacked and having the Shoggoth come out and help her out, basically fighting the other Shoggoth, which is just cool. And I don't know what it is about the design of the creature. It really did feel like a stop motion animation type version, like the Ray Harryhausen type of style. It didn't feel like CGI in this episode. I don't know, it was something, maybe it was just a bit brighter on the scene than it had been in earlier episodes, but I really liked how it looked. I love stop motion animation. I think it's cool. So
yeah, no, it was
that
really
age
good.
That I enjoy it.
Yeah,
so,
it was really good. I love the fact that as well, the Shoggoth gets its werewolf moment with howling to the moon or screaming with its little sort of tentacles coming out of its mouth. And I love the fact that it's something that Dee has ownership of and control, that it's effectively her pet in a sense because of it being passed to her by Atticus here. I thought that was just really, really good. So I like that. Yeah, I mean, the Shoggoths have been really just good throughout. It's a nice beast. And of course, again, calling back to the Shoggoth attack on the cabin in the woods from the first episode as well. Yeah. But, we have here Christina effectively turning the tables on this band of merry men and women. And with the villagers as well. So we see here that basically she has gotten wind, or she was told by Ruby. We just don't know, I suppose, in that sense.
Well, I think it's the warning from her father, from Titus, when Ruby and herself are driving back to the house. That warning sets her on edge and to make her realize that Ruby could be untrustworthy. And then when she sees Ruby eyeing up the vial of her blood and guts, effectively, I think is I don't know how she describes it. I can't remember the exact words, but she says it's all the pieces of her body that she uses for the transformation. When she sees Ruby doing that, because she's been kind of teed up by Titus, that's why she does it. Oh, by the way, Titus making her gorgeous car crash into a tree and her flying out of the window like Superman.
That was definitely like a bullet from a gun.
I didn't think they were driving that fast.
No, she really did fly out that front windscreen, for sure. But
I think that's what set her on edge, and that's why she set up her whole plan to kind of be able to drive them off track and stop their counterspell, effectively. But yeah, we got a bit of a fight between Leti and Ruby, or Leti and Christina in the form of Ruby, and Ruby wins. Christina wins, throwing
that
Leti
I was
out to her
not
death.
expecting.
Yeah, particularly because earlier on we saw Christina take back the protection spell that she'd put on Leti to make her bulletproof. We saw her touch her as she was walking out. She offered Atticus's life for the book. Atticus and everybody else refused, and she takes that protection spell off Leti. So it was one of those moments where you're going, did they just kill Leti here at the start of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
These final scenes, you know?
Absolutely. I was completely shocked when she was thrown from the tower there in the village. And, I mean, it was a great fight, first off, because, Leti almost gets the upper hand. You're there as Christina in the form of Ruby is dangling through that trapdoor with that fall below her down to the bottom of the tower. Yeah. And you just think, oh, stand on her fingers.
Yeah.
But it's completely reversed with, as you say, Leti being chucked off the top of the tower and seemingly die there and then.
Yeah, I absolutely thought she was dead there, but I love the reveal, and she lifts up her shirt, and it shows that she has the mark of protection that William had on him. That's when we were first introduced with William and Ruby. He took off his shirt and had those kind of horns, that kind of look of the tattoo that he had on him. So it looks like they've used the Book of Names to get another protection spell on Leti to replace the one that Christina took away. So I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, because it's the Mark of Cain, isn't it? I think. Is that the protection spell? I remember that's what Christina says to her in the Picture House Theatre when she first gives Leti that protection after she hands over the files.
Yeah, that's the one that Christina gave to Leti and took away. but this is the one that William had on him. That's the protection spell, effectively, that Christina had on her, I suppose. They're the same person. That's definitely the mark that we saw on William when he took his shirt off the first time we saw that sex scene on the stairs with Ruby. So I remember that from earlier on in the season. So interesting, of course, with the whole opening up of this book of names for Leti and Tick to use by going back and speaking to Tick's mother and to Hattie. They get all the details of how to use this book, I suppose. So they can now use it with full power, which is where they are now towards the end of the episode.
So this was the only thing I was wondering as to why they didn't put the protection spell onto Atticus, because ultimately with Leti being thrown off the top of the tower by Ruby/Christina, and then the roundup of Montrose, Ji-Ah, and Hippolyta. I suppose actually Montrose would have been pretty happy that he'd been stopped by the country folk of Ardham County, because his back must have been shot to bits after bending over doing that salt ring. No more salt ring. But they come back to the ruins of the lodge, where it's all set up for Atticus's death and the spell by Christina.
So to your question, why didn't they put the protection on Atticus? Well, I understood from, and I think Christina's the one that calls it out specifically, this magic always involves some form of death, pain, some body part, something like that. So Atticus does have to willingly give himself over to this in order for them to do the counterspell. That's what I understood from it. Effectively, she's trying to take the power herself, give herself immortality, give herself the full power of the book, and he's trying to break that spell and spread that power of magic to the entire Freeman family and all black people, effectively. So,
and hence why he has to go to his death and sacrifice himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will say that moment when Christina cuts into both of his arms at the same time, I literally watched the screen and went, there's no coming back from that.
No, absolutely.
She's cut right the way up from his hand all the way up to his shoulder, with a knife on both sides, and the amount of blood coming out of him. There's no way to put that back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it was that moment where the scientist in me was going, oh, that rate of blood loss is not going to last very long. Exactly. And so I think he did last longer than he maybe should have done. He held on as long as he could for effectively then Ji-Ah coming into the fray here. Here is the importance of Ji-Ah, is that she was able. We have Leti starting the counter-incantation, actually. Yeah. But Christina is there saying, no, it's not going to work, because Atticus hasn't had both. He's eaten that bit of Titus. We have that great moment where he's kind of chewing on this rubbery bit of Titus's flesh. And then he downs what he thinks is Christina's blood, and it needs to have that connection, that intergenerational connection of the Braithwhites, along with his own blood, which is also a bloodline of them through Hanna, and that is broken because he's not taking Christina's blood in that moment. But Ji-Ah uses her seven tails to connect both Christina to Atticus, so that then the incantation that Leti is shouting can actually then begin to work.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, the tails out of the eyes again.
I know.
Such a creepy CGI.
Yeah, it's so good.
Bit of work. It's kind of cool. But again, as we've been saying all episode, I love that this is tied all the way back to previous episodes. I love that everybody's involved, everybody has their moment, everybody has something to do, and everybody has a reason to be in these moments to close out this season and sacrifice Christina. I also love that it's a callback to a throwaway line from the first episode, I think it was, with George and Montrose. Montrose going, white people have so much power and they have magic too. It's oh God, what's wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
What's wrong with the world? They have everything, including magic. And the series ends effectively with that actually turning out to be the prediction of what's going to happen. They've taken all magic away from white people and giving it to Freeman and black people, effectively. The magic is now within black Americans, effectively. So that's a really interesting one. They pulled that line, that one kind of drop joke, absolutely, effectively from earlier on in the season into their resolution for the show. So really
absolutely. And we see as well through Ji-Ah that the memories that she sees as they're connected. So we see what happens to Ruby through Christina.
Yes.
And we see her lying there in the bed in her basement.
Yes.
We see that as well then with Atticus, you see him handing over the power of the Shoggoth to Dee. We see him writing then the letter to Montrose that Montrose gets. And because Montrose is wanting to save him, and the letter is saying, you are my father, you're not my biological father, but you have done so much for me. And again, I like how that connects to Dora right at the start with Atticus. That there is this acceptance of who Montrose is, and despite his faults, what he has done, even though he may not have understood that at the time of growing up and having that backhand from Montrose, but having seen what happened in Tulsa and that he was the savior of George Montrose there during the Tulsa massacre. That's really an emotional piece for me, and I thought that was absolutely great.
Yeah, it was, and it's a good way to tie up that kind of that whole storyline with Montrose and the inability of these two characters to connect for so many years. Effectively, they'd fallen completely by the wayside. Even throughout this season, they'd fallen apart from each other multiple times. But I like the sentiment in that final kind of line from the letter. You may not have been the best father to me, but you have another chance being a grandfather to my son.
Yeah.
I love that kind of closing out of that relationship as it goes. I do want to...
Yeah, because he also says, be who you are. Again, reference to him being gay.
Yeah.
Be who you are, be open, but don't repeat the mistakes that occurred between us two.
Exactly.
And it was a really, really great sentiment, I thought.
Yeah. I do worry about Ruby. It took a while for me to get it in my head exactly what had happened to her, because it all happened off screen to kind of prevent us from knowing that Christina was Ruby. But there is a kind of a line that's said from Christina in the episode where effectively she has to keep the body alive of the person that she is imitating or inhabiting in some way. She has to keep that body alive. We know that William was almost killed or was killed, but is still in a coma. Something he may never recover from. That's why Christina was on the warpath, wanted to kill Lancaster, and eventually accomplished that goal last episode. We know that the body that was used for Hillary was found after the burning down of Ardham House, again in a coma, being kept alive. I don't know what's happened with Ruby, though. I don't know whether she's chemically induced into a coma and she's going to be easily able to come out of it, or whether it was a crack over the head from Christina, where she may never recover from the coma.
Yeah.
But it does give them options. If there is a season 2, it does give them easy options to bring back Ruby, because of that line that she's in a coma, not dead as such. So I believe she's not dead. Or at least that's the way the episode ended. And that's why we got the flash of her in bed or lying in the bed back at Christina's house. I think that's why we got that flash, to say that there is a possibility, if they do get a second season, that we could have her back, because great character, old Ruby. Actually, all the characters are really good in the show, so I don't really want to lose any of them, but we did lose Atticus here, who was quite a huge role in the show. So
well, that's it. I mean, that's the other brave thing here with this show and with this finale, is that, in the same way as George being killed in episode 2 and being lost effectively, other than that short return when Hippolyta is in the multiverse. Again, the fact that this has to be a willing sacrifice, that it's that bittersweet happy ending, effectively, in that they have set out to do what they had to do to change the path of how magic was used in our world, and that unfortunately meant Atticus had to sacrifice himself. And so, it's that moment where he's talking to Montrose about him being, the guy with the baseball bat, that fate. So, it's very fated here. There is that. Resignation is not the right word, but it's that acceptance of of what needs to be done and what price that will take to do it, but that it is one worth taking. And I thought that was great to have, because, in so many cases you have this where everyone's saved and nothing means anything. And this really deepens that emotional impact with the sacrifice of Atticus. And I love the fact that actually it's left with everything that's happened. It is Leti, Ji, Hippolyta and Ji-Ah that remain here to carry forward these traditions and so on. And it harks back to that circle under the museum in Boston where it was Hattie, Hanna and Dora, the three ladies, who had carried this secret, this burden, this protection, this objective that they had. And I thought that was really phenomenally good as well.
Really, really cool. Really, really cool. Just back on the point about Atticus sacrificing himself. Remember, this is to do with what Dora said to him in the vision he had in the Red Room, as I'm going to call it, where he's talking to Dora and Dora says to him, "You're going to have to sacrifice yourself." And why wouldn't you? You have to sacrifice yourself for something important. You have to not be afraid to sacrifice yourself for something important. And that's effectively the guidance that she's giving him. She's telling him right there, you're going to die, but you're going to die for something really important to the world. And that matters. Which is a really big statement for the character and for the show. So that was kind of my final point about the episode. Is there anything else that we didn't cover? I don't really think so. But is there anything else that we didn't cover in the episode, John?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only thing just quickly to bring up is I love when Hippolyta gives Dee that fully formed and drawn and published Orinthia Blue comic as well, and shows it to her. And just because it's really beautiful, you see the images taken from Dee's drawings and made into this, what almost looks like, is a professional comic book. And you see the Dee being kind of slightly withdrawn because, she's afraid that she won't be able to draw again because it's the withered arm. And then we get that moment as well where Hippolyta opens that door and there's just this kind of bluing light, the sort of whirring and beeping of a machine, and then again it cuts away and you're like, what is going on here? And of course just back to the bionic arm, which was fantastic.
Exactly.
But I like that fully formed Orinthia Blue comic being shown as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Also like the touch of Ji-Ah being chatted up in a bar. That's really funny. Where the guy comes up to her and is like, "Oh, foreign, are you Chinese?" to this Korean lady who's sitting in the room, and then when she responds to him in Korean, he says, "Oh, you don't even speak English," and takes that as an opportunity to sit down opposite her. And her response to him is, "Do you want to die to have sex with me?" It's like, and then he steps up and walks away, understanding where he's at. We did get a little bit of closure as well on Ji-Ah's story. Yes. She did make up with her mother. She did become respected by her mother as her own person, not just her daughter trapped inside a Kamiho or being possessed by a Kamiho. There is a connection that they had before her mother died, is what she says. And the inspiration for her to get involved in the whole piece was that whole witch doctor element at the end of that episode where her mother brought her to the witch doctor and she was told, "You will enter the darkness and there will be a lot more blood to be seen before your end." So that's the reason why she knew to step up at that moment when the cloud of dark magic was enveloping Atticus. So I love that tied in again. All of these standalone elements that you don't know whether they're going to come back really did tie into this.
Yeah,
last
it really
episode.
did. It was excellent stuff.
Really good stuff. Overall, for me, this episode rounded out the series really well. It felt like there were so many big stories and big things that were going on in the show, and this really felt like the last 20 minutes of a big, impressive, epic film. It didn't really go into any of the day-to-day kind of topics like some of the other episodes have done, the massive amount of racism that was going on at the time, how people lived at the time, but it did close out the show really well. I thought it was a really good capper for this 10-episode season. Really enjoyed it. Overall, John, what did you think?
For me, I thought this was a phenomenal ending. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I just liked the connective tissue for this ending throughout the rest of the series, and I thought it was brave having the death of Atticus. I thought that really packed some punch. It gave a weight to why they were doing what they were doing and what they were doing it for, which I thought was great. And I that's why I'd give this 5 protective shoggoths out of 5. Nice. I thought this was just really, really cool ending. I think it just... I mean, it flew, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And again, you could argue maybe there's a bit more required here, a bit more required there. I mean, I was wondering, you know, is it just because they have the book of names that they're able to be now fluent in this language? But they have been studying throughout the whole of this series. Absolutely. So I was like, okay, that's probably why. Plus they have that moment in what you were calling the Red Room with Hanna, with Dora, and with Hattie. So I think, for me, this was a great ending to a great series, and that's why I give it 5 protective shoggoths out of 5.
Excellent. Yeah, as I said earlier on, you know, HBO are knocking it out of the park with their shows. They always seem to. They have this ability to create something new and different when they put shows. And, you know, last year we covered Watchmen, thinking that was going to be absolutely terrible because we're fans of the comic. We've enjoyed the comic book. We couldn't imagine that somebody would be able to create a sequel to that stood up to the vision. And I think in some ways it's a better translation than we could have possibly expected in terms of Watchmen. And now this show comes along. I had no idea what it was going to be like. We were hoping for kind of a horror show coming up to Halloween. We were hoping for some show that would scare the pants off us. It did that and loads more. It
Absolutely.
taught us tons of stuff we wouldn't have known. It's given us some really good characters, some really interesting stories, things that we may not have known before. And some fantastic performances in this show. Wow, the actors in this show are so good. We're definitely going to be seeing a lot more of them in the future as well. So really, really interesting. 2 final notes I have on the episode that I didn't mention as we were going through. The reason why I was calling it the Red Room was because I was really seeing similarities between Twin Peaks, the kind of areas that they go to in their mind where they're taken away to these kind of spooky, freaky red rooms to get information that they bring back to the real world. When we saw Tick and Leti go off and be given their guidance by Hanna and by Dora. So really was like, oh, we're in Twin Peaks here. That's cool. And also the song that they all sing in the car, Life Could Be a Dream, or Shaboom, is the name of the song, done by the Chords. I could not get it out of my head for days after watching the episode. We saw this on Wednesday or Thursday this week, but couldn't get it out of my head after watching it. And I was trying to think there's some movie that's in that I've heard the song and I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept looking everywhere for it. Finally found out it's from Clue, the 1985 comedy movie, that they play that song in there. I probably seen that movie about 150 times. I've seen it so often. So I was wondering where it was from. It's from Clue, in case, or at least there was a cover version of it done, that was used in the movie Clue. So that's why I had it in my head. But I love that scene. I love the whole family together doing a sing-along, even with, as you say, reluctant Montrose.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. That is it for, hopefully, only season 1 of Lovecraft Country.
Yeah, who knows?
Have no idea where they'd go next season. There's no sequel book been written. There's no further material from Matt Ruff, and the story does tie up very well together here. But there are so many shows that do an anthology idea, like American Horror Story, like The Haunting TV show, which just came back with The Haunting of Bly Manor last week. A completely different show with the same actors involved, or a lot of the same actors involved. So perhaps they could do another Lovecraft Country story with some very different material, potentially for a second season. But I've absolutely loved it. Misha Green, you are a new star to me. I'll be watching everything that Misha Green's involved in the future.
Definitely.
Yeah, really, really good. Anything else before we go on to some feedback, John?
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I'd love to see a season 2. It's the same with Watchmen, but at the same time, I absolutely understand how this is a really well-formed piece of TV and series. So we may not do, but let's just watch this space and see what happens. Exactly. And if nothing else, I think bask in the wonder that has been season 1. Lovecraft Country. But with that, I think let's get on to some feedback of episode 9. Yeah. First off, over on Facebook, on our Facebook group, where you can go to facebook.com/groups/TV podcast industries to leave any comments or discussion points on our spoiler posts that we've been putting up there. We have Donald Dennis, who says on episode 9, what an episode. HBO is getting a lot of play out of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and good on them for shining a light in dark corners. I'm originally from Oklahoma, and every time I hear about it, I'm freshly disgusted by the racist jerks, past and present. Compared to some of the other episodes, I didn't feel as shocked or surprised, but wow, that was well done. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Donald. I think you're right. It really did provide a very, whether you want to call it operatic, certainly with that final bit, it was just very, it felt appropriately meaningful, involved, personalized, as well as giving the sense of the atrocity that happened in Tulsa to the black community and the neighborhoods there. That it felt really seminal and important in the same way that what happened with Watchmen, also from the first episode of Watchmen, as you say, shining that light in dark corners, those pieces of history that have been forgotten, or even darker, have been hidden by people to prevent the tough questions. So thanks, Donald.
Yeah, I know our friends over in the Delightfully Dreadful podcast, over in Double P podcasts, were asking the question, which is better, which is the better representation of the Tulsa Massacre? Was it Watchmen, or was it this show? And I know for myself, with Watchmen, I think that part of the story kicked off all of the episodes, so it was put together very well. It very much felt like a kind of a movie quality opening for the show. There was big bombastic moments. You had the planes flying overhead. Certainly in Watchmen, they actually did it that way. But I think because the character that's escaping from the massacre is a child, I don't think you get the emotional resonance that's in there in this episode of Lovecraft Country, in episode 9 of Lovecraft Country. I think the emotionality of having our three major characters back in this time, experiencing it, also seeing Montrose, seeing what happened to his younger self, what he was going through. I think the emotional resonance of what they created in Lovecraft Country, for me, is the better version of the two put on screen, just because they're trying to accomplish two different purposes. One is an entire episode dedicated to showing what's going on, and the other one is kicking off a series showing what the starting point for a character.
I think we just have to kind of really, from my perspective, just caution against saying whether one is better or another. I mean, for me, they have different reasons for showing it, and with Watchmen, it was the starting point. Yeah. It wasn't about race relations after that, but within the context of a comic book hero critique and sci-fi show, which was about ultimately, I think, had a different view on how they were using the Tulsa Massacre, and I think it shone that light on that, and it was based in Tulsa. I think Lovecraft Country has a different reason. That's where they lived. It's in a different part, it's the penultimate episode where they're coming back to that in great detail. Yeah. And it's because people lived and, as you say, experienced that. And that's where you get that emotional depth. Whereas because of the children, you see the events, and that's really it. And the two children that were escaped from that massacre, but then didn't live in Tulsa again. So a bit like the family, but they didn't forget. That was the reason why they were going after different people in Watchmen. So I don't think one is better or the other in my mind. I think it's great that shows are tackling that. Yeah. And of course, they're tackling it in different ways because there are different ways to talk about it.
Exactly. Thanks so much for that feedback, Donald. Trevor Green, also over on Facebook, says you can understand Tick's anger towards Montrose, but it was so frustrating to see him initially having no empathy for his father, having to return to what would have been the most traumatic moment in his life. It's been a while since the TV show has brought tears to my eyes, but I certainly welled up as we were shown the pain of Montrose's past and Leti being with her son's great-great-grandmother while she burnt to death. It was gratifying to see Tick begin to understand his father's sacrifices and even become the stranger that saved his parents and uncle. I imagine this episode is meant to reinforce a sense of fate and make us wonder if Tick can really escape his... Really, really good feedback, Trevor. Yeah, there were certainly moments of the last episode. I know even on the podcast itself, I was quite emotional when speaking about what Montrose's experience and what happened to him. Not only what happened to all of Tulsa, but bringing it down to this individual character who also had the worst moment of his entire life on the same night as everybody in the whole city, in the whole area, was having the worst moment of their lives as well. He was having another layer on top of that. So beautifully written. But yeah, certainly, talking about the sacrifices that his father went through. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it would be tough for the show to have Tick instantly forgive his father. Part of the makeup of his character is he's hated his father for decades for what his father did to him and put him through when he was younger. So I think we spoke about it before, I think, on the podcast, but that idea where a line of dialogue would make a character go, oh yeah, all's forgiven. It feels like you do need to have some time to reflect on what you've seen and what you've experienced in order to make your decision how you're going to move on with that other person. And we see here from the letter at the end of the episode and the end of the season that Tick has had that time to think about his relationship with Montrose and maybe not forgive him for his past mistakes, but give him an opportunity to prove that he can be a better man now that he's going to be a grandfather. And provide that acceptance.
I think forgiveness doesn't mean you forget about what's happened.
Exactly.
It means that you are able to effectively be big enough to move beyond that and to try and reset the relationship.
Yeah.
And that you're not holding something over someone else for eternity, because otherwise it just poisons that relationship. And I think that's the whole point that Atticus is doing this here. So yeah, I completely agree with you, Trevor. I think, and a bit like Derek mentioned before about the gradation of people's character. Tick is not the perfect person. Mm-hmm. Neither is Leti. Neither is anyone in this show. And because everyone has that light or dark, evil, good, whatever side to them. And generally, life is very much more complicated than the dichotomy of just pure, they're a good person, they're a bad person. Exactly. But yeah, thanks, Trevor and Donald, for your comments. Over on Twitter, our Twitter handle being at TV Pod Industries, Wilby talked about episode 9 as well. He says, Hattie was actually Tick's great-grandmother, which by my calculations, she's in her 60s, which would place her birth around 1850, and is Hannah's daughter. Wilby also responds to a question that I had, which was, it's called Cream of Wheat, the poster that we see in the alleyway, when, Dee is being cursed by Captain Lancaster.
Oh yeah, the one with the moving eyes.
The one with the moving eyes, yes. I know that there was a picture shown of Cream of Wheat, and it actually reminds me of a cereal that we had here, which still do, called Ready Break. It's kind of like crushed up oats and wheat, and it does a very fine sort of breakfast cereal.
I genuinely never knew what was in Ready Break.
No, I didn't. It looks like sawdust, actually. That is the thing.
Or something like wallpaper paste. Yeah. It's like that kind of packaging.
But with enough sugar on it, it tastes amazing.
True.
And I used to put a lot of sugar on Ready Break. And you had it warm as well, so it was always the winter cereal.
Yeah, it was like porridge for kids.
It was like, exactly.
Thanks for that, Will. I don't think I would have known what Cream of Wheat was. I don't think we sell it over here.
No, it's not sold over here at all.
More products that we wouldn't have known. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Wilby also wanted to know, does Letty's protection spell extend to anything she is touching at the time? I was confused as to why the Book of Names didn't burn, especially given the fact that we know it burned before. Helena Bates on Twitter was also asking the same. I was also wondering this because when Leti held on to Tick's great-grandmother's hand, it appeared to not burn until she let go of it. I always have so many questions that I don't remember until someone else asks it.
Know the feeling.
Yeah, absolutely know the feeling, Helena. Yeah. I mean, yeah, the book that Leti was holding, it didn't burn at all. And I don't remember Hannah, that the book was burning when Hannah was taking it out as well. So whether that is to do with the fact that it is the book in itself is protected, because what we learn actually from Hattie in episode 10 is that the book was bound and protected after Hanna had taken it away. So maybe that binding of the book through magic protected it, or it could just be that transference that, because it can't be something that you touch, because otherwise Hattie would have been saved with Leti holding her hand. If Letty's invincibility incorporated everything that she touched, well, then she was holding Hattie's hand, yet Hattie still burnt in that house in Tulsa.
But I suppose, as Helena was saying, maybe just her hand would have survived the burning, which is so much worse. So, good that she let it go. I know what you mean. I think in my head I was kind of thinking maybe it is the book that's, the book itself has its own protection, because we're talking a book that's centuries old, so has probably encountered various different things that have gone on. You know, you don't want a magic book that can no longer be read because someone pours a cup of coffee over it. You know, so it's got some kind of protection probably on the book. But, you know, understandably, I totally understand the idea from Will as well, and from Helena, because effectively Leti is completely protected when she's walking through fire. You don't see her clothes going on fire, for example. Yeah. So everything she's holding on to and everything she's touching is protected from whatever damage is going on around her. But that doesn't necessarily mean the book itself doesn't have its own protection, I think, is what was in my head.
Yeah, so thanks Helena, and thanks Will B for the comments over on Twitter.
And since it's the final episode of the series that we're talking about, we definitely want to say a huge thanks to Will for all of his Twitter comments and all of the elements that he's pointed out to us over the course of the season. It's been great at picking up stuff that we weren't able to pick up and popping us on a message. So thanks so much, particularly Will, for that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Will. Over on our email at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, Elaine Graves let us know here on the Dreadful Podcast the spoken word poem from episode 9 is called Catch the Fire by Sonia Sanchez. Yes. Thanks Elaine for that. What we found was that operatic version at the end was composed by the show's soundtrack composer Laura Cartman as a requiem piece of that spoken word poem as its basis.
Yeah, there's a great article about that in the LA Times. Go search it out. Just look up Lovecraft Country episode 9, and they have an interview with Laura Cartman, who came up with the concept of turning that wonderful poem into this operatic piece. And I think, John, I know last episode, because we've got a couple of messages in over on Twitter and various places again telling us what the piece was, but the piece you liked at the end of the episode, the operatic version of the poem, effectively was specifically created for the show, because they felt, Laura Cartman specifically said, having this amazing recreation of Tulsa felt like they couldn't just choose a song from history to stick in there. They wanted to do something big. They've been creating score throughout the season between herself, Laura Cartman and Raphael Sadiq for the show, but they felt this episode, the content that was involved in it, felt like it needed a requiem, felt like it needed a new operatic piece of music to kind of underline what a huge moment in history that was going on. I think they just did a beautiful job. Really interestingly in the article as well in the LA Times, this was one of the first shows, I think, that's come out towards the end of the season where they weren't able to record the orchestra together. We've seen that in a number of shows now that have been delayed because of COVID and the pandemic, where the musicians can't record together. We've seen a couple of shows. I think Star Trek Discovery just came out this week, and that was one of the shows that's done that. But with throughout the process from for Lovecraft Country, all the score was created by people in their own homes, all sent in and all mixed in a studio by Raphael Sadiq and Laura Cartman. So they did a great job, considering I certainly didn't notice that it wasn't a full 45-piece orchestra on the score this season. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it also really highlights to me that, you know, I'm not a fan of poetry, but of course music is poetry set to music and sung, and I much prefer when poems are given a soundtrack, whether that is a 4-piece band, whether that is solo singers and a choir, or whether that is synths and some turntables. I much prefer it to the spoken would.
I'll have to play the Sonia Sanchez Catch a Fire version that's on YouTube. There is a video with music added to it as well. It's actually really, really good too. So thanks so much, Elaine, for letting us know.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine.
And everybody else that sent in that notification. But thanks, Elaine, you got there first.
Yeah. Elaine also sent us a second message. Elaine said, "Hi guys, this is my second email, and I have to write again to let you know how much I appreciate your take on Lovecraft Country. I really have appreciated your honest praise of the show, a show that means so much to the African American community. Your willingness to have empathy for our history means a lot. I follow one of the writers of the show on Instagram, and I wrote her and gave you guys a huge shout out for your work and commentary on the show. I wanted her to know that there are others who appreciate the work HBO and the writers have put into the show. Again, thanks so much, and know you have gained a subscriber, Elaine." Thanks so much, Elaine.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really lovely of you to send in that message. It's, I think we absolutely do not know everything. We get a lot of things wrong, and for sure, but we are willing to learn here. And I think because the writing, the show, the actors, and the context of it all has been so incredibly interesting, but also emotional, and in some ways it weighs heavy on us as well.
Yeah.
And I think we have to learn these things for sure.
Yeah, I've certainly spent the last 10 weeks watching these episodes. I've certainly had so many conversations outside of the podcast, and have read so much really interesting stuff, and so much more to learn, definitely. So really happy and really, really glad, Elaine, that you've let us know that you enjoyed our coverage of the show. It's, it's kind of sad we're at the end of this season, and we can simply see from the numbers that we get for our podcast, we can see that we were doing The Boys at the same time, and we can see the audience for that it's somewhere in the region of about 3 to 4 times the audience that we get for something like Lovecraft Country. And we know, HBO is a premium channel in the US, and Sky Atlantic is a premium channel in the UK, and not everybody can afford those channels. So I totally understand why not everybody can watch it, but it's always saddens me when a show that's as good as this can't get the massive audience that it would get if it was on a cable channel. Of course, it also wouldn't get the ability to make the story the way that they make it on HBO. So it's one of those ones I'd love if there were more eyes on a show like Lovecraft Country. While The Boys was great fun and there was some great commentary in there, there was some really interesting stuff in there. I think on balance, this is the show I've enjoyed covering more in a way, even though there's only myself and John on it. I always like doing podcasts with you, John, of course. But,
why, thank you.
But especially when we have a show like this, I've really enjoyed going deep into the historical side of it. Whereas with The Boys, there's no historical side to it. It's its own thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I mean, thanks, Elaine. Mm-hmm. And of course, thank you to everyone else for, teaching us, certainly a lot of new things, and also bearing with us where maybe, we've made a bit of a mistake, or error in what we've said. It's that supportiveness, I think, which is really nice, and the interactions that we have with our fellow listeners on all of these shows that we do. But I think that's really particularly important for something like Lovecraft Country, which is dealing with a very specific issue that is, wrapped up in sci-fi and horror, that it is how we gravitate towards this,
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that, speaking about racism in the US particularly, but, racism is more of a pandemic in some senses than COVID is. It's something that, we're fully aware of, and we are intrigued in hearing the stories that are being told now. We love talking about them. So we really, really love that ability. But what also is interesting in the show is that experience of Montrose that he's going through as a closeted gay man, eventually getting to the point of his own acceptance by the end of the series, is something that specifically hits us,
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something that we can speak to. It's something that we can talk about as well, alongside learning all the other stuff. We're also able to talk about our own experiences throughout the show. So really, really good that the show's been able to hit us like that as well. Thanks so much, Elaine. Really, really appreciate it. And again, thanks to everybody else that's been sending in your feedback throughout the season. But really good. One person who has been sending in audio feedback throughout the season is Steve Brown. And he sent in his feedback on episode 9.
Hey, John and Derek, this is Steve. This is for Lovecraft Country, episode 9. I hope it records this time. My phone is having some sort of issue with recording voice memos at the moment. But in case you're wondering, I did not rewatch episode 8 before this one. I wasn't going to watch those creepy kids again. I couldn't do it. But a couple of quick things about this episode that kind of stood out to me is I think it's interesting that this is now 2 TV shows that we've seen the depiction of the Tulsa Black Wall Street race massacre, race riot, whatever you want to, whatever it's called, twice now, Watchmen, and then this show. So I think that's interesting, and so it's good that we're seeing these things and we're being reminded of them. But also, I think it's interesting, too, that no one thought that Montrose would be triggering for him to go back to that, even though they needed him. But at the same time, they probably weren't thinking about that in 1955. And it's interesting to hear when you listen to the HBO podcast, official podcast, where they talk about these kind of things about the writer's room and how they discuss that they were really trying to put themselves in the mindset of 1955 people for this. Other 2 things that I really, really love. I love that we heard the story, the I Got You Kid story earlier in the season. Now we get to see Atticus be that guy. Also, it's kind of cool that, even though it wasn't mentioned earlier, but Leti got to be the stranger as well that kind of saved them. So that was really, really cool that the 2 of them played into that future. And I can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts and your guys' talk of this episode. I think it's queued up next in my podcast player. Okay, next episode, season finale. Are we going to get a season 2, or are they going to wrap it all up in one episode? I guess we'll see. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, we had the same question. Feels like all wrapped up in season 1, but you never know what's going to happen in the future. Really interesting points there, Steve. Again, you're absolutely right. Why would they not have thought that Montrose might find it a little bit difficult going back in time to that awful night in Tulsa? Effectively, when he arrives back, doesn't he walk out of the room and just stops dead in the street going, I can't go with you, to see what's going on this time again. I can't relive it, So,
and he hesitates going through the rift as well.
Yeah.
You can sense the emotional turmoil that he is going through in that moment. And then it's not just the reliving, which was hugely affecting for me, but it's also reliving it with Atticus there. Yeah. It was really a great bit about the episode. It really gave it that emotional depth and connection to what happened in Tulsa. Yeah. And personally for Montrose.
Exactly. Thanks so much once again, Steve. Hopefully you're going to send us in your feedback on the last episode of Lovecraft Country.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Next time on TV Podcast Industries, we're going to do our roundup of season 2 of The Boys, talking about our final pieces of feedback on that show. I think we're going to come back on Lovecraft Country again one final time. If you want to send in any feedback to us when you've watched episode 10 of Lovecraft Country, email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, and we'll come back in a couple of weeks' time and record an episode just with any feedback that you may have on the show. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show, but otherwise, that is the end of Lovecraft Country Season 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's fingers crossed for a Season 2 potentially.
Yeah. Or fingers crossed for another show as good as this.
Yeah, exactly.
If HBO can produce a show like Watchmen last year, and then this year, something else next year, let's see what's on the horizon for them. It was interesting. I know Steve mentioned about the official podcast. It is interesting when they talk about the writer's room for that. It's 2.5 years ago or more that they were writing the show Lovecraft Country in the writer's room. So that kind of gives you an insight in if they do get a commission for a second season right now, if they haven't been writing on it. It's going to be about 3 years before we get the second season of that show. So that's just a little bit of insight in it. Maybe we'll get something else. HBO have been known to produce some great stuff on their channel, so maybe we'll see something else next year. Meanwhile, we do hope you stay subscribed to the podcast. You can subscribe to us at tvpodcastindustries.com or any good or evil podcast catcher. Just search tvpodcastindustries.com, and we will be having some new shows coming up when we get into November. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, fellow Dreadfuls, for joining us. Again, it's really, really great to discuss these fantastic episodes of Lovecraft Country with you. We will be back again soon with more podcasting. But until then, remember, keep watching, keep listening, and take care of each other. Bye.
Bye.